All right, let's talk containers on AWS. If you're in that world, you have definitely come across the big question: EKS or ECS? It's a huge decision, one that can shape your whole setup. So we're going to break it down and help you figure out which one's the right move for you.
Yeah, that's really the core question, isn't it? And our goal here is simple. By the time we're done, you're not just going to know what makes them different. Nope. You'll actually have a solid way of thinking about it, a framework to confidently pick the best fit for whatever you're building.
You know, it feels like every single team that gets serious about containers on AWS ends up right here, at this exact crossroads. It's the first big fundamental choice you have to make about how you're going to manage all your applications.
And here's why it's such a big deal. On the surface, they both do the same thing, right? They help you manage containers at scale. But when you look under the hood, their core philosophies, really their DNA, couldn't be more different.
Okay, so let's get right into those two philosophies. This is really where you start to see the huge gap between them.
And this really lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got EKS. Think of it as the universal standard. It's built on Kubernetes, so you get all the power and portability of that massive open source community. But then you have ECS. It's the AWS native solution, designed from the ground up for that super tight, seamless integration with everything else in the AWS ecosystem. So what does EKS actually do? Well, think of it like this. AWS takes care of the really complex part of Kubernetes, the control plane, the brains of the operation. But everything else, how you define your apps, how you deploy them with tools like kubectl, that's all just pure standard Kubernetes that you'd use anywhere.
Now, ECS is a whole different beast. It's a completely proprietary AWS native thing. It doesn't know what a pod or a deployment is. Instead, you're using AWS-specific terms like task definitions. The whole point is to give you a super smooth, streamlined experience. But, and this is a big but, only if you're living and breathing inside the AWS world.
Okay, so we've got the high-level philosophy down. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. Let's put these two side by side and really dig into the key differences in how they actually work.
And this table just nails the core trade-offs. Look at EKS. The orchestrator is Kubernetes. That means you get low vendor lock-in and high portability to other clouds. The downside, a much steeper learning curve. Now look at ECS. It's AWS native, super easy to learn, but the vendor lock-in is high. You're basically building for AWS and AWS only.
Still, if you're using EKS, what does your day-to-day look like? Well, it's just standard Kubernetes. If you've ever touched K8s before, you'll feel right at home. You're running your YAML files, defining pods and deployments, and then you just kubectl apply them. Nothing new or surprising here. But then you jump over to the ECS workflow, and it's a totally different world. You're not writing YAML for pods, you're creating a task definition, probably in JSON. You're setting up an ECS service. You're clicking around in the AWS Console or using the AWS CLI. It's a very guided, very AWS-y way of doing things.
Okay, let's talk money, because this is a huge one. With EKS, you're paying for the managed control plane. It's about 10 cents an hour for every cluster you run. It's not a lot, but it's there. With ECS, that control plane is completely free. You only pay for the actual compute resources your containers are using, whether that's EC2 or Fargate. And, for smaller projects or startups, that can make a real difference to the bottom line.
All right, we've gone through a lot of the technical stuff. So, how do you actually make the call? Let's take all this info and turn it into a simple decision-making guide based on what your project actually needs. So here's the rule of thumb. You should seriously be looking at EKS if your team already knows Kubernetes, if you need to be able to run your stuff on other clouds, not just AWS, or if you want to use all the amazing tools from the Kubernetes world like Helm or Argo CD. If those are your priorities, EKS is probably your answer.
And a great real-world example? Think of a big fintech company. They've got a super complex microservices setup, and for business reasons, they need to run parts of it on AWS and other parts on Azure. How do they do that without going crazy? Kubernetes is the answer. It's the common language that lets them bridge those two clouds, and EKS is how they run it on AWS. But on the flip side, you should absolutely choose ECS if your number one goal is simplicity and just getting things done fast. If you're an all-in on AWS shop and you just want to get your containers running in production as quickly as possible without having to learn a whole new ecosystem, well, ECS was practically tailor-made for you.
My favorite example here is a startup. Their whole world revolves around shipping features and iterating quickly. They live on AWS. For them, taking a 3-month detour to learn the ins and outs of Kubernetes is just a waste of time. It's overhead they don't need. ECS lets them get their APIs and background jobs up and running with almost no friction.
So, as we start to wrap this up, you can see it really all boils down to one final, core trade-off. Let's summarize everything we've talked about.
And this chart just says it all, right? EKS, 5 stars for power and flexibility, no question. ECS, 5 stars for ease of use. And would you look at that? AWS integration, also 5 stars. It's so clear. What you get with one, you're usually giving up on the other. It's a classic balancing act. And that's really the bottom line here. It's so important to realize that this isn't about one being better than the other. It's a choice between two totally different ways of thinking. Do you want the universal power of the open Kubernetes standard, or do you want the native simplicity of the AWS ecosystem?
So, I'm going to leave you with this one final question to think about. For your next project, for your team, which one of those things matters more? Is it universal power, or is it native simplicity? Once you answer that question, you'll know exactly which service to choose.